Good morning, everybody. Happy Trinity Sunday, even though we carry in our hearts deep grief this morning over the discovery of this past week of 215 missing bodies of children that were forgotten on an Indian residential school. So I'm very much carrying that grief. We've already taken time to mourn together, and I do feel I want to speak to it yet more and in the days to come. But this is Trinity Sunday, and I guess we call it that because we had the Father in the Old Testament, the Son in the Gospels, and then with Pentecost last week, we now have the Holy Spirit. We have all three, and it's the beginning of ordinary time in the church calendar. Lots of bells and whistles from Advent to Christmas to Epiphany and Lent and Easter and Pentecost. But now for half a year up until Advent in early December, we're in ordinary time where God wants to show the extraordinariness of the ordinary, how to experience not signs and wonders, but the gift of wonder in everything that we experience. It's a beautiful time of year. I love it. It's the first Sunday in the season of Pentecost, or after this Pentecost, that we will walk through. And it's my joy to continue today live with you, not pre-recorded. I just felt I could be a little more present with you. It just feels meaningful and kind of a baby step towards hopefully soon, with that glimmer of hope of being able to regather again. I offer you this continuation of our teaching on embodiment, seeing the good news through the eyes of John the Beloved. I think we started in January, and I have a feeling that 2021 is John. I think we're just going to continue to work our way through John. You know, sometimes you feel a pressure to change the theme or the teaching topic, and I just sense God's just pulling us into something so profound and real and important and timely. And today our topic is based on this reading that we've just read through. And I want to start with a trivia question, a Bible trivia question. We love Bible trivia in our church, and there's usually prizes. I can't offer one today, but what is, other than the resurrection, what is the only miracle that is recorded in all four Gospels? And well, we kind of gave it away, didn't we? Because that's our text, the feeding of the 5,000. But the difference, there's some real nuances here. John had a front row seat to the life of Jesus, and we are seeing some details and some perspective that we don't see in the other three Gospels, that we see in John's telling of the story in our text today. And speaking of which, have you ever heard two people tell a story of an incident they saw, the same incident, but when you hear them tell the story, it sounds like a completely different story? And the reason is, of course, is that each of them, this happens often, it even happens in the retelling of the Gospels, is, and this happens in court cases when insurances are being sued and challenged. Everybody's got a perspective. Everything happens so fast, and they bring their own seeing, they bring their own experience, they bring their own emotions, their presuppositions, their point of view. I love what Richard Rohr says. Every point of view is a view from a point. And we all have a certain point. Another way to say it is, we don't see, it's not what you see, it's how you see. You think about light. It says the first thing that God said in the creation was, let there be light. Well, did you know we can't see light, but light is the means by which we see everything else. So a lot of the gospel is not, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. It's how you see. That is really important to God. Or another way to say it is, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So, you know, if your children get in a fight with another child at school, you bring your own emotional attachment and experience. And that's not all bad to that experience, but it can sometimes skew and distort what you see. And this is very much the case in our text today. And I think so much so, I saw this so much in our text, that I want to call our teaching time today, what glasses are you wearing? In other words, we wear a certain set of glasses that we bring to everything in life. And we see this very much as a theme in this text as you look closely into this story. And of course, the context is the Sea of Galilee. And what we're doing is probably looking at the route that was taken by Jesus from the shores of near Capernaum and across to the eastern shore of Galilee, commonly known, there's a town there called Bethsaida. And that kind of blue circle there is where Jesus had been. And he was probably getting tired. There'd been a lot of arguments with the Pharisees, as you remember our texts from previous weeks. So they all got in a boat and they sailed across the Sea of Galilee to a much more remote area. And our text tells us that the crowds, because Jesus had been a one-man wrecking crew against sickness and disease, and he was just destroying the works of darkness and setting people free from depression and chronic illnesses that they thought there was no hope for, and there was so much life and hope and that he was bringing. And so John says they followed him. They went the long way around, but they were so desperate for more that they followed him around the northern shore of Galilee, and they found him there. And Jesus was relaxing with his disciples. Maybe we could call this the shortest retreat in history, because they're just having a little chill time. It says they were sitting on this mountain, which probably gave them a vantage point to this massive crowd of people that are heading their way. And Philip is sitting with Jesus at this point, and he's mentioned in the story. And the reason why he comes up is he lived in this town, Bethsaida. That was his hometown. And that's probably the reason Jesus asked him this question. It was kind of like this. Jesus said, hey, Philip, looks like we got quite a crowd here today, and we want to be good hosts, so we're going to need to feed these people. So do you know a good shop nearby where we can buy some food to feed them? And of course, Philip would have known some shopping centers in Bethsaida with some good kosher food. And I love the way that John comments on this. He basically says Jesus was kind of teasing Philip. He was testing him. I would like to say Jesus was being a spiritual optometrist. He was giving Philip an eye test to see what kind of glasses he had on. And immediately Philip did what most of us would do, is he pulled out his calculator. And he quickly did a calculation, and he said, Lord, I think in our shared resources, remember that they had a treasury. Judas was in charge of the treasury, and there were some very wealthy women who were supporting Jesus and his disciples. So they had funds, but and some scholars believe that's why Philip pulled out that amount of half a year's wages to say, even if we used everything we have, everybody would only get one bite. Can you imagine our first shared meal, maybe Thanksgiving or whenever we get together for a shared meal again, and we're all allowed one bite? Well, that is cruelty, because of course, all you do is to get the taste on your palate and get your taste buds going. So you're just getting started. So it's like a hope deferred. In other words, Philip put on his scarcity glasses, and who've heard me through any amount of time know that we've often talked about this world's economy is based on scarcity. It's based on lack, and it's like a pie, and there's only so much in that pie to go around. And when that's the case, your response is automatically close your fist, tight-fistedness, to hoard, to withhold. And but the kingdom of God, of course, is based on abundance and unlimited supply. And the natural response to the kingdom economy is an open hand and generosity. And so Philip, first of all, had the glasses of scarcity on, but we see another set of glasses coming to play in this story, because Andrew shows up and he's got a little boy with him, and he says, Jesus, we have a little guy here, and he's got 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But you get the sense in the story that Andrew's almost embarrassed to bring it up. He says, but what is that amongst so many? I love the emphasis on small. 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. And so he's almost embarrassed and dismissive to bring it up. It's kind of like, in the face of this need, what difference would this ever make? So I'd like to offer the second set of glasses we're often tempted to put on, and it's acedia glasses. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's the Latin Greek word that kind of formed the word for sloth as one of the 7 deadly sins. But it's a sloth that's the opposite of joy, as we talked about Julian of Norwich. It's a sloth that says, what difference does it make? Why even try? It's so little, it's so small. And many of us put those glasses on because all we do is we see our resources in the midst of homelessness and mental illness and drug addiction and the deep needs all around us in our world. It can be overwhelming and paralyze us with this acedia. Now, it's good to know your limits. It's important to know your limits. But there's a dialectic there, a tension, a paradox when you walk with God. Because God never asked us to embrace our limits so that we are paralyzed. He asked us to embrace our limits so we know our dependency on God. And Paul said this in Ephesians, I love this. Now unto him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could even ask or think, according to the power that works where? You guessed it, within us. So there's this paradox. If you're a follower of Jesus, is you embrace your limits, you know your limits, but you also know God's unlimitedness, and you walk in that tension. And so Jesus said, have the people sit down. And Jesus now becomes the host of a meal, and he wants to be a good host. And when you have people to your home, if you're a good host, usually you tell them to relax, make themselves at home, to sit down. And John comments that there was a huge portion of grass for the people on this hillside to be able to sit down. And then he makes this strange comment. He says, and there were 5,000 men there. And the other 3 gospels say the same. But something's going on here with John in the 4th gospel as an eyewitness. There's something ironic going on, because there's another set of glasses that John was aware that needed to be removed, and that was the glasses of invisibility. And it kind of went like this in that time, and up to our present time even, that unless you were an adult male, and in our culture perhaps an adult white male, you were invisible in that time, an adult Jewish male. If you were a woman, you were invisible. If you were a child, you didn't count. And of course, we can add to that list, can't we? If your skin color is different, you're invisible. If you have if you're a person with a physical or mental disability, or I like the way they said it on the ICC call a few weeks ago, they have a different ability, then they're invisible. Or if you're gender non-binary, you're invisible. When someone is invisible, what happens? When you don't see someone, you can easily dismiss them. You can diminish them. Like, what could they do? What could this little child do with his little lunch? We dismiss their contribution. We dismiss how vital they are to a miracle that is about to happen. And even worse, when someone's invisible, you can dehumanize them, exploit them, traffic them, abuse them. They become an object to be used rather than a person to be loved. And that is exactly what happened this week with the discovered remains of 215 indigenous children. Is they were invisible, and that's why they were gone so long. Not invisible to their loved ones. Zini told me yesterday that more than just this residential school, many residential schools, missing children. They were invisible, but not to God. God has a way of making visible what was invisible. This is a time of unveiling, and a time to grieve, and a time to stop and to mourn these lives, these children in the image of God. So how do we put on the right glasses? In the book of Colossians, Paul uses the analogy of taking off the wrong clothes and putting on the right clothes. He says, put off, works of the flesh and sin, put on compassion and goodness. Putting off and putting on was a common metaphor in the early church for discipleship. But remember, this was before they had glasses. If they had glasses, they would have said exactly what I'm saying today. I'm sure of it, because so much about it was not what you see, but how you see. And so the first step in putting on the right glasses is the glasses of receiving versus taking off those invisibility glasses to receive someone, to see them, to acknowledge. Jesus said, if you receive one such little child in my name, you receive me. So there's something about not just receiving that person and saying, oh, you're so cute, but recognizing that they have a gift that unless we become like them, we miss the kingdom of God, Jesus said. That they have a gift, that this little child that Andrew brought to Jesus was actually the catalyst for an incredible provision miracle that was about to happen. And so Andrew brings this child and he says, here's a boy with a small lunch. And this remarkable irony shows up in this story where I think John's almost writing, if he was speaking, it'd be tongue in cheek. Because the other three gospels, as I mentioned, say that there were 5,000 men. And John says the same, but John is the only gospel, look it up, who mentions a child. Did you know that the 5 loaves and 2 fish are mentioned in other gospels? But not the child. But John sees the child. And he noticed, and the irony is that John counts 5,000, but the child isn't among the counted. He's not among the counted. But he was the one who brought the miracle. So take off your invisibility glasses to see and receive each person in the image of God. I remember talking to Terry LeBlanc, that wonderful Mi'kmaq First Nations elder, that I've sometimes spoken together and interviewed together in different settings. And I was telling him about Lower Post, Sini. I was telling him about just the incredible journey we've had with Lower Post. And I could tell that his eyes registered concern when I told him our church would often go once or twice a year up to the Yukon border at the site of this most notorious residential school, which thank God is being torn down as we speak. And big ceremony coming up on Indigenous Day. I'll be talking more about that in the days to come. And I could tell there was concern. So I looked in Terry's eyes and I said, you know what? We always receive way more than we could ever give. We go for our own healing as much as anyone else's. And when I said that to him, I looked into his eyes and I saw this registration of recognition. It was like, okay, he gets it. He understands. We are gifts to one another. And the second set of glasses is Thanksgiving, taking off our acedia glasses that say, well, what can I do? The first thing that Jesus did when he received the loaves from the little child is that he gave thanks, John said. But I don't think Jesus just gave thanks to God. I think Jesus looked into the eyes of that little child and he said, thank you. And I don't think he just gave thanks for the food. I think he gave thanks for the child's generosity. And I think he thanked God for that child and for that child's generosity. Generosity gets you out of the wrong economy. It gets you in the kingdom economy. Gratitude gets you out of the scarcity economy. Julian of Norwich wrote, this is the holiest prayer, the loving prayer of thanksgiving. It's remarkable to me that in spite of wave after wave of the Black Plague that Julian experienced, far worse than you and I could ever experience. She didn't have Zoom. She was shut into a little alcove on a church. People had to feed her through the door and handle her latrine through the door. They had no World Health Organization and Centers for Disease Control. They didn't understand germs. And yet most of her writing, first English book by a woman ever written in history, it's all about the goodness of God, about gratitude, about worship, about praise, about hope, and about faith. For her, the glass was not half empty. And through that, as I read her book, I realized there's two things that are true. Life is beautiful and life is hard. And gratitude helps you hold that tension together. And finally, generosity. After Jesus took the bread and he broke it and he gave thanks, he gave it. And the natural response of putting on the right glasses is a generous heart. We felt this at the beginning of COVID when we went into the lockdown, as there was this temptation. There was such a hoarding spirit over our culture. We were running out of toilet paper and running out of, everybody was fear and in panic. And it was hard to resist that fear and that temptation, wasn't it? We were tempted to hoard. And the Lord just gave us such a strong word. Keep your hand open. Keep an open hand in this time. And as they were all fed, there were scraps of food all over the countryside. And Jesus said to his disciples, it says when they had enough, and here's a quiz, how much did each person get from Jesus to eat? It says in the scriptures, there was more than enough, more than enough. And that word enough just comes in this text and just rolls over us. Enough, enough, enough. That is the kingdom that we're living in. When they all had had enough to eat, he says to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. And I believe that's a word for our body. It says that they gathered 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over. Sometimes we feel like scraps. We feel like our lives are just crumbs. We've been broken again and again and again. And God says nothing will be wasted. Not one hurt, not one disappointment, not one darkness that you've gone through. Gather it all up. And the 12 baskets, this is a sign. Remember, John loved signs, but not the kind of signs that wow people or impress them. Wasn't into that. The signs for John were pointing to something. So what was the significance of the 12 baskets? Well, earlier in the text, you may recall as Shalisa was reading that there was this almost off-the-cuff comment that John makes, that it was during the time of the Passover. Now remember that the Passover was recalling every year God's liberation of the 12 tribes of Israel from slavery. And they're leaving Egypt and crossing the Red Sea and then ending up in the wilderness and experiencing God's supernatural provision through the manna again and again. And it's that story of the manna and provision in the wilderness that provides the backdrop for this story today, for this sign that John is pointing to, and it'll continue in the dialogue in the weeks to come. It was a reminder to Jesus' own disciples and those who had joined his story that God had provided for his people no matter where they went or what they did. And it was a sign that God would always provide more than enough and sustain them. Sustainability doesn't start by living cautiously. Sustainability starts with the truth that God is our sustainer. Jesus is with us. A couple of weeks ago, we celebrated Ascension Sunday, where Jesus ascended into the heavenlies. And then the next Sunday was Pentecost. A lot of people think that when Jesus ascended, that he left. Actually, the ascension is actually the opposite of Jesus leaving. He didn't go away anywhere. It says he filled heaven and earth. That's what happened at the ascension, is that he's no longer limited to one body over there in Israel by the Sea of Galilee. He's with you. He's with me. He's now present. He's with you and me. So you never have to worry about provision again. What if you knew that no matter what, where you go, what you do, that you never have to worry about provision again, about being taken care of? I have a beautiful hair cutter. It cuts my hair, cuts Kathleen's hair. Vietnamese woman and her husband have run this little shop on Commercial Drive. We've been going there since practically when they were teenagers. They're now parents of children, 9, 10, 11 years old. And we've had so many conversations. I talked to her about angels and Tony. They're so fascinated about the angel experiences I've had as we traveled to Lower Post. And they believe. They're Buddhists, but they believe my stories. And they're saying, I want to see an angel. And the last time I was there, I was shocked. She likes to buy these little lottery tickets. She knows her limits and plays within them. And I don't recommend it, but she does it. So I'm just going along with it. And she said, Gordie, and she was totally serious. She looked in my eyes with her mask on, and I had my mask on. She looked in my eyes. She said, Gordie, if I win the $15 million lottery, and they, by the way, just got an eviction notice from their house, and they're looking for a new place to rent. She said, if I win the lottery, I'm going to give it to you. And I thought she was joking, but she was serious. She was totally serious. Well, how am I going to pray, right? I feel some conflict there. And so she said, I'm going to give it to you on one condition. I said, what's that? She said, just buy me a house to live in Vancouver so I don't have to move anymore. And for a second, I thought, man, if I had $14 million, yeah, I'd be pretty set for a while. But you know what? What Jesus is offering us here in this text is better than that, because you can lose $14 million. It can go in the stock market, the housing market can go bust. You all know Jesus said moth and rust corrupt and thieves break in and steal. Don't put your treasures there. But he's offering something better, a kingdom where all will be well, because Christ is always with us. So for reflection today in the silence, uh, look at y'all for a sec. In the silence, I want you to think about the glasses that maybe you've been wearing, and maybe the Lord wants to come and gently help you. He doesn't rip them off. Sometimes I had my glasses ripped off when I was a kid, you know, and it hurt. That was one of those unfair moments that Joanna was referring to. and God comes very gently and helps us take off the wrong glasses so that we can put on the right glasses. And so my question for reflection, and we're gonna, for those of you that have been watching by recording at another time or place, we're gonna stop recording in a minute, but invite you to also take this time and just be aware of God's tenderness with you, his provision with you. In light of today's teaching text, what pairs of glasses are God inviting me to take off? And what is he inviting me to put on? Maybe you've been limiting yourself. What can I do? What difference will it make? Acedia glasses. Maybe it's scarcity glasses. Maybe it's invisibility glasses. You haven't noticed the gifts of people around you. Or perhaps it's just there may be others. Maybe it doesn't even have to have been covered today. Just be open to that. So we're going to I'm going to just mute myself, and we're just going to go into a time of silence. And I invite you to just reflect on this for 2 minutes.